Humans are deadworlders. When someone says that, younger races tend to imagine a world high in gravity, or perhaps with violent weather phenomena, tectonic activity, or hostile flora or fauna. They often imagine that their own worlds are deathworlds. This isn't the case. In reality, some or even all of these conditions tend to be relatively normal for planets that eventually evolve sapient life. After all, there's relatively little need for higher intelligence to evolve, along with all of its increased burdens, if you don't have at least some trials to overcome. Humans are not deathworlders, they are deadworlders. That's to say they come from a planet that is now completely inhospitable to all life. Of course, it didn't used to be this way. It was once, according to their records, quite the beautiful world. That was until the Bhren-Comvin War. The Bhren, never being a particularly militaristic people, were losing. It wasn't desperate yet, but their analysts could find no way out without ultimately submitting to the Comvin's demands. Their only hope? To try to resist long enough to at least lessen the burden of those demands. That, however, did not seem to be going well for them. It was at around this time that the Bhren discovered humanity and committed a galactic taboo. They uplifted them. Among many intelligent species, there are often stories of uplifted cultures using the technologies given to them to wipe themselves out, as their people are still in disunified and in open conflict with one another. Alternatively, there are stories of the uplifted turning their aggression towards the uplifter, or the galaxy at large. Truthfully, however, this rarely happens. The real reason it is taboo is because whatever the species achieves, no matter how high they climb in the galaxy, none of the other races will feel that they have earned their place. Consider the Volgotan. They are some of the best medical researchers in the galaxy. Remember the news a few years back about finally discovering a method to transplant organs for the Udari, a race so genetically diverse that such was believed to be impossible outside of growing clones for each member of its species? That method was discovered by a Volgotan researcher. Now I know what you're thinking. It was actually a Hevru, wasn't it? That researcher merely plagiarized the Volgotan researcher's work, and quite brazenly, I might add. So why did the Hevru plagiarist get all the credit? Because the Volgotan were uplifted. Even if they managed some incredible breakthrough, they never earned the right to it. That brings us back to the humans. The Bhren uplifted humanity to aid in their fight against the Comvin, and humanity seemed quite eager to give them their assistance. It helps that, in humanity's eyes, the Comvin's war was an unjustified war of aggression. Well, starting a war primarily so you don't have to pay import taxes on certain raw materials does seem a bit excessive, admittedly. What humanity in their naivety was unaware of was that, despite seeing the Bhren as their allies, they would never be viewed the same way by the Bhren. To the Bhren, humanity was an ugly tool, and nothing else. Humans were used as shock troops by the Bhren, tossed into the front lines as literal meat waves. Granted, they did quite well in this role, better than anyone expected. You see, they didn't simply charge mindlessly across open ground, but moved from cover to cover while harassing and flanking Comvin fortifications. If no such cover existed, they created their own. Barricades, trenches, even calling in an artillery barrage to create craters they could use as foxholes. Their guns were also better than expected. Despite using primitive chemical propellants to accelerate a projectile, they proved no less formidable than the Comvin's plasma guns, perhaps even superior. Their infantry won battle after battle against the Comvin and, if one is being honest, became one of the most elite ground forces in the galaxy during this time. In space, the humans were used in a similar role. The ships they were able to build were put in the front to soak damage from the Comvin's guns, while the Bhren returned fire with theirs. This didn't work out quite as well as their ground forces did at first, but humans quickly adapted their designs. They weren't given the knowledge or skills to reach parity with either the Comvin or the Bhren, but they used what they were given to design ships better suited to the technology they had. Heavy armor and redundant shield generators for ships intended to soak damage, larger engines and bigger guns for those intended to close in. They hadn't been able to build any real capital ships, but, when coupled with their strategies, their destroyers and frigates proved to be as formidable as anyone else's in the conflict. With the humans at their side, the Bhren were not only able to make the war punishing for the Comvin, but they actually began to turn the tide. To the Comvin, this was entirely unacceptable. For a primitive species to tip the scales, one that was uplifted no less, was reprehensible. And so the Comvin made that fateful decision to attack humanity's cradle, a planet they called Earth. At first it seemed that there was a bit of luck on humanity's side. Just as their fleet launched to head to Earth, their plans were intercepted by human and Bhren intelligence agencies. The fleet was also briefly detected when making a stop to change their heading, confirming that they were indeed heading for Earth. The humans asked the Bhren to aid them in the defense of their planet, and the Bhren agreed. However, the latter was reluctant to do so. That's why when a Comvin battle group, one that was clearly intended to serve as a distraction force, was spotted on the edge of one of the Bren's systems, they instead changed direction and headed after them, without telling humanity. When the Comvin arrived, they initially intended to seize control of Earth. That way they could force the humans to work for them instead, and they no doubt intended to make them pay steep reparations as well. However, if the humans who fought off-world against the Comvin were fierce, the ones who fought in defense of their home planet were fanatical. The Comvin brought a massive invasion force to seize the world, but anything you bring by ship couldn't hope to match an entire planet of zealous warriors on the ground. The Comvin tried far longer than any other species likely would have tried, but eventually gave up. That was when the Comvin committed one of the galaxy's greatest taboos, as they decided to simply destroy the planet by bombarding it with asteroids. Humanity intercepted this order as well, and quickly got to work evacuating as many of their people as they could. What remained of their defense fleet had also been bolstered by other fleets that had managed to return to the Sol system during the battle for the planet. As a result, they were able to protect the evac ships as they fled, since most of the Comvin fleet was preoccupied wrangling the asteroids they intended to fling at the planet, but they didn't have enough forces to go on the offensive. They pleaded with the Bhren to send aid, unaware until now that the Bhren fleet that was supposed to support them had instead chased after another target and was too far away to render any aid in time. Humanity did all that it could, but there simply wasn't enough time. By the time the first wave of asteroids hit the planet, they hadn't even managed to evacuate 1/10 of their population, not including those who were already fighting off-world. Over 9 billion lives perished in a firestorm, or as the planet's crust cracked and erupted beneath them. The humans quietly withdrew from the conflict, or perhaps it was simply that no one bothered to pay attention. With their homeworld destroyed, their species would certainly perish out in the void, among the stars that, to the rest of the galaxy, would never truly belong to them. What little consequence they were seen to have had no longer existed. The war between the Bhren and Comvin would end soon after as well, as many factions were wary about the Comvin's escalation at Sol. Mind you, had it been just about anyone else, most of the galaxy would probably have declared war on the Comvin. However, since humanity was an uplifted species, the outrage wasn't so severe. Still, it was disconcerting, and allies and rivals alike made it known that it was time for the war to end. Peace talks were held, however nothing could be agreed upon. In the end, the war ended in a ceasefire, with both sides still wary of the other, each claiming the other held territory that was rightfully theirs, and fortifying their borders against one another. Despite this, a period of peace, if tense, had come, and all it took was the annihilation of a single planet. A planet that belonged to a people who fought a war that was not their own, for a side that never truly accepted them.